Good afternoon. This is Betty Meredith, President of the Retirement Resource Center, a retirement education and training company for professionals, clients, and consumers. And I'm happy to be your session host today for this webinar on advanced strategies for using housing wealth to improve financial outcomes in retirement with Barry Sachs, PhD, JD, as our presenter. As your clients retire and their regular income from employment or professional activity stops, their cash flow considerations become critical. Studies have shown that for most retirees, the concern about running out of money later in life outweighs any other concern. Also, studies show that more than half of all retirees are homeowners. This webinar examines 4 situations in which home equity can be used to diminish a retiree's risk of running out of money while maintaining an acceptable level of living expenses. And examples will be given to illustrate each of the 4 situations. Barry Sachs is a tax attorney specialized in pension law. He has a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT, and he published the pioneering research paper in 2012 modeling the use of reverse mortgage credit lines to mitigate the effects of adverse sequences of returns of risk in retirement accounts. And while he was developing his model for the use of reverse mortgages in retirement income planning, Barry became aware of the needs of retirees or soon-to-be retirees, including those who are moving to new homes and those who are in the process of divorce. And as a result, Barry published additional papers demonstrating the various uses of reverse mortgages to address these retirees' needs. So Barry, thanks so much for being here with us today, and we'll now turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction and for reviewing my several years of work. So we're going to talk today exactly about the points that Betty mentioned, which are some strategies that use housing wealth to improve financial outcomes in retirement. We're going to take a little road trip, as I sometimes call it. We're going to go to 4 different destinations, and they're listed here. One is to look at securities portfolios used for retirement income, which is typically a 401k account or rollover IRA. Then we're going to move on to replacing a conventional mortgage, because it turns out that people now seem to be retiring with a conventional mortgage still in place. And that's another thing that needs to be looked at, because that's a substantial drain on cash flow. Another situation we want to look at, another destination on this little road trip, is to downsize, consider downsizing, to eliminate debt and to increase income producing investments. And finally, we're going to take a look at sober divorce. So each of these items, each of these destinations on our little road trip is indicated by a lowercase letter, A, B, C, and D. And within each one, there's the actual situation we're looking at, and then some tax considerations. And finally, at the end, we've got a few extra tax considerations if we have a few extra minutes. So each of the 4 lowercase letters, A, B, C, D, indicates one of the situations that we're looking at. So we're going to look at the first one now, the sequence of returns risk. Typically, people who retire and who have been foresighted enough to put away money in a 401k plan or in some other savings vehicle typically hold that money in the form of a securities portfolio. And one of the things that happens with any securities portfolio is there's volatility. And the volatility is what can lead to difficulty. Drawing on a portfolio. If you're not drawing on the portfolio, then the order, the sequence of returns is totally irrelevant. And that is easily proven mathematically. But as soon as you start to draw on a portfolio, to take money out, it then becomes very important to look at the sequence of returns, when the weak or negative returns occur, and what to do about it. So if the sequence of returns has any negative events, as it's bound to over a period of a typical retirement is 25 or 30 years, there's bound to be some negative years and there's going to be some in the early years, there's going to be some in the late years. And we're going to look at this and consider it. So let's consider a very simple example to illustrate something I'm talking about. Think about a portfolio with a value of $100 or as many more zeros as you'd like after that, because this entire concept scales irrespective of the size. So suppose that in that first year, the portfolio loses 20%. So at the end of that year, it's worth $80, or again, as many zeros after it as are necessary. If no draw is taken, then it will require a 25% gain in the next year or even series of years to return to its original value of $100. If, on the other hand, a $5 draw is taken at the end of the first year after that 20% loss, it leaves an end value of $75, and therefore it would require a 33% gain in the next year or next few years to return to its original value of $100. The point is, taking any money from a portfolio that has gone down makes it that much harder for the portfolio to recover. And a series of this, even two or three such situations, can lead to the portfolio becoming exhausted prematurely. And that's a thing that we have to worry about. In fact, that's what led to the famous 4% rule, because on average, a portfolio does much better than 4%. But because there are downturns, and that 4% rule was developed in the context of drawing money from the portfolio every single year, whether there were upturns or downturns. The amount was always the same, adjusted only for inflation. Now let's look at a more complicated example. The one I just presented had basically 2 years in it, or 2 or 3 years if you want to add a few at the end to make it recover. Here's a 30-year example. This is real numbers. That is, this is actually the S&P 500, a portfolio made up of the S&P 500 that began at $750,000 and that continued over the 30-year period from 1990 to 2019. That was a 30-year period. I did this work in 2020, and therefore I couldn't include the 2020 results. But in any case, here's the portfolio, and if we look at the lowest line of the 3 lines that are there, that represents no skips. Every year, the same amount of money, adjusted only for inflation, was taken. And that amount of money, as it happens, for reasons I'll explain later, was a pretty big number. It was 6% of the portfolio's value. So we started with 750,000, took 6% the first year, and then every year thereafter took the same dollar amount adjusted for actual inflation. So these are real numbers based on a real portfolio made up entirely of S&P 500 stocks. And every year money was taken as reflected in the bottom line. That's the value of the portfolio. And notice that by 2018, which is before the end of a 30-year retirement, it had run out of money. On the other hand, if we just skipped 2 draws, particularly in the early years, we get the top line. And that shows that there is left in the portfolio at the end of 30 years, nearly $600,000. It's about 570 or so. If we skipped 2 draws in the later years, then we end up with the middle line, the one that's red. And that one shows a remaining value at the end of 2019 of about $300,000. Now, the point is, of course, that if somebody is retired and they skip a draw, one of the annual draws from the portfolio, they've got to live on something. And what do they live on? Well, as it happens, the title of this presentation is Housing Wealth. And if you take a draw from a reverse mortgage credit line, then what will happen is that you've got the money to live on and you've let the portfolio recover. And indeed, as we'll show in some real examples a little further on, the amount of money that's left in grows at the portfolio rate, whereas the cost of drawing on a reverse mortgage credit line is an interest rate which is lower over time than the value of the portfolio's growth. So it turns out to be a net gain. And in a paper that I'm working on right now, I'm actually evaluating the legacy amount, the amount that's left under various assumptions, various situations. So the point in this illustration is the same as the point in the previous little 1 and 2 or 3 year illustration with $100. Here we're talking about $750,000, and we're talking about extending the life of the portfolio, the source of money, beyond a 30-year retirement, to leave something for a legacy, but more important, to avoid running out of money, running out of cash flow.